Okay, can you hear me? Yay. All right, hello, welcome. My name is Dora Lynn Rossman. I'm the Dean of the Library here at Montana State University, and welcome to our annual Trout Lecture. Thank you for being here. You'll hear from me more than once, so you'll hear those comments broken into two pieces. We do have Nick Lyons here joining us and really appreciate him making the trip to be here. And because we know you're here to hear Nick, we're going to make you listen to some other people first before you get there. So I know you'll stick around for Nick because we just have a few other things to share with you. The next thing I want to do is introduce the General Director of Opera Montana, Susan Miller. And you may have noticed some slides up here about Opera Montana and a partnership. And so we have a special treat for you of a musical quality. And so Susan's going to introduce that to you and tell you a little bit why we thought you might be interested.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Miller, General Director of Opera Montana. So grateful to Dorlin. We've been working with MSU Library and especially the Archives Department and Jody Allison Bonnell to archive our entire history of Opera Montana, our 48-year history, but even more exciting right now, we are starting on a new project to archive the creation of a brand new opera that we have commissioned. We are developing and premiering in September. A River Runs Through It. It's a really exciting project. Tickets go on sale. How do you get tickets to River Runs Through It? Well, let me share. Currently, we are in pre-sales right now with some of our renewing subscribers, some of our nearest and dearest. Subscriptions to our entire season go on sale May 7th to the general public. Beginning June 1st, early access single tickets go on sale to anyone who's bought a ticket this season. If you haven't done that yet, you still have time. Tosca opens May 7th at the Ellen Theater, May 7th through the 10th. And then general single tickets go on sale June 15th. And after you hear our next person, Annabella Joy, I would like to welcome up to the stage here. Annabella is going to, yes. Annabella is going to preview one number called Too Much from A River Runs Through It. In this, she's portraying the character Heidi, who we've renamed from Rawhide in the book. And she kind of shares her beliefs on love here. So take it away, Annabella.
I've got a way with horses. I've got a way with love. I make respectable folks feel better, 'cause I give 'em somebody to judge. I fish a lot of rivers. I hook a lot of men. I'm a believer in catch and release. Everyone deserves a chance to start again. Too much beauty, too much talent always gets folks talking. Always had my share of love, but kindness don't come often. Once I balanced on the back of a galloping horse the entire length of Main Street. My skirts flew high, their eyes went wide. They pronounced me beauty queen of Wolf Creek. Too much beauty, too much talent always gets folks talking. Always had my share of love, but kindness don't come often. Too much beauty, too much talent, always gets folks talking. Always had my share of love, but kindness don't come often.
All right. Thank you so much, Annabella. And thank you so much to Opera Montana for joining us and being a partner. And just to remind you, we have a Trout and Salmonid collection in the library, and Jim Thule, our Trout and Salmonid librarian, will be talking to you in just a minute. But I wanted to suggest to you that you think about the modern roles that libraries play in our society. And so we have things like the Ivan Doig collection in the library, and he was a writer, and we have his meticulous note cards, his whole process that you can see how he wrote. And what's different about this moment with Opera Montana is we're in a digital environment. And so for us to try to capture the process of what it looks like to make an opera today is really a challenge. And so we've been really fortunate that the Opera Montana team has been willing to work through that with us. And we think it's important to realize how they came to the opera that will be coming out in September. So it's really exciting, and I hope that you can see a connection of perhaps your interest in angling and fly fishing, and the opportunity to hear that in a musical form. And I actually have had the opportunity to be at some of their workshops, and I can tell you it's something that you'll really enjoy. So, and if you don't like opera, or if you think you don't, you might have actually thought that's an opera song. So there are a lot of songs like that that are in there that I think you'll find very accessible and enjoyable. So, so next I want to introduce Jim Thule, our Trout and Salmonid librarian.
Excellent. Well, I'm sold. I've never been to an opera before, but I think I'm definitely going to go. So thanks. The song was lovely. So again, welcome to the 2026 Trout and Salmonid Lecture. We are honored to have Nick Lyons here as our speaker this year. Again, my name is James Thule, and I'm the Trout and Salmonid Librarian at MSU. It's a cool title, right? And before I introduce the next speaker, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our collections, the work I do, and ask for your help in keeping our work going into the future. We currently have the world's largest research collection related to trout and salmonids. Think about that just for a moment. To put it in a training day, Denzel Washington, King Kong kind of analogy, Yale, Oxford, Harvard ain't got nothing on us. How cool is that? We, of course, do our annual lecture series like the one tonight. We have over 24,000 items in our print collection, have collected nearly 400 oral histories from anglers in 70-plus nations on 6 continents around the world, and now some personal papers are archival collections of dozens of fishing luminaries, including Bud Lilly, Nick Lyons, Craig and Jackie Matthews, John Garrick, Tom McGuane, and we recently acquired the papers of Ted Leeson. We've created classes that teach critical thinking skills, something desperately needed in the world today, and that instill the importance of fisheries and the environment in our students, who will be the ones protecting these places and fish after we are gone. We end our angling classes with a trip to Belize, where students see firsthand the impact of plastic pollution and climate change, and also the successes of a small country that has done a spectacular job to preserve its wild places and fisheries for future generations. We have cleaned up nearly 6,000 pounds of plastics from the beaches. To demonstrate that this is not just a local but a global problem, we picked up McDonald's cups. There is not a McDonald's in the country of Belize. We've built artificial reefs, including one in the shape of an M. So there's an M in Belize as well as in Bozeman. And of course, we've caught bonefish, tarpon, and permit. We learn about the culture of Belize, interesting foods like bamboo chicken and royal rat. I know Craig knows what bamboo chicken is. It's iguana. I'll let you guys know. And generally provide the students with hands-on experience in fisheries research that stick with them throughout their lives. When I arrived at MSU over 20 years ago now, we had roughly 6,000 books in our collection, no oral histories on angling, a few angling collections, and taught no classes based on our trout and salmon materials. Building these collections has been my life's work. This is the longest I'll ever work anywhere. This is the most important work I'll ever do. I believe in this, and I believe in the importance of preserving the memories, culture, and science of fisheries in Montana and the world over. This is a material future wildlife managers, protectors of the environment, politicians, and researchers will use to keep these fish in these beautiful places alive and healthy for generations to come. Nathaniel Reed, who helped write the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, once told me if you want to win an environmental argument, start with good science. Your MSU library is collecting and creating and disseminating that good science so we can help to protect the fish in the beautiful places they live for generations to come. We have probably all experienced working with or knowing someone who has deeply involved in a project or idea, and when they left, it kind of stagnated or faded away. I'm not going to be at MSU that much longer, and I desperately don't want that to happen to my life's work. Currently, the Dean and Administration supports and values the trout and salmonid work we do, but we all know administration change, projects change, sometimes new ones replace old ones. What we're raising funds right now for is an endowed chair in trout and salmonid studies, so we commit the university in perpetuity to managing and housing these collections and teaching these classes and doing the work that we're currently doing. And so if you believe in the work, and it deserves it, people like Bud Lilly and Vern Gallup and folks who helped that found this collection, that's what they wanted, and Bruce Morton, that is our dream and what we really would like to happen. So if you believe in this, please consider helping us donating to the Trout and Salmonid Chair Endowment. Okay. So now I have the honor and the privilege of introducing Craig Matthews. Craig and his wife Jackie are great library supporters. They have participated in our angling history program and given MSU their personal papers to preserve. In addition to being an acclaimed guide, Craig has written multiple books, founded the iconic Blue Ribbon Flies in West Yellowstone, has won some of the most prestigious awards out there for his and Jackie's environmental work, including the Protector of Yellowstone National Park Award, the Lee Wolf Award, and the Guardian of the Madison Award. In addition to all this, Craig co-founded the 1% for the Planet with Yvonne Chouinard, which I think has raised like $500 million, like a huge, insane amount of money for the environment. We all owe Craig and Jackie a debt for helping to preserve Montana, Yellowstone, and the wild areas the world over. Plus, he's just one of the truest, nicest human beings you'll ever meet. So Craig and Jackie, thank you for all you do. Thank you for your participation here tonight. And Craig, the stage is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God, it's great to be here tonight with you folks. So many friends out there, so many handshakes, smiles, and shared stories. You know, I've been working with James and Bud Lilly before his passing for several years on MSU's Trout and Salmonid collection. And Jim and his team have worked so hard raising funds to make permanent the chair of the collection. Like Jim said, 20 years, committing the university to this important work in perpetuity, and that's the key word there, in perpetuity. You know, we can raise funds all we want for a couple years. Everybody slaps each other on the back, but we have got to step up to the plate and make sure that this program is funded in perpetuity for our kids and grandkids and future generations. Bud founded the collection, and his wish was to make sure this happens. So please, if you believe in this important program, let's all join in his dream and keeping it alive forever by stepping up to the plate and donating to the library's Trout and Salmonid Chair Endowment. It's far too important to us as anglers and members of our community, those who love nature, wild trout, clean air, clean water, the written and oral history, all of us here tonight, to let this slip away. We cannot let this slip away. So thank you for your consideration on this very important matter. Don't go home and forget about it. If you got your checkbook, write a little check tonight, and then write a monthly reminder to keep writing a monthly check or a year-end check. Jim mentioned 1% for the Planet. We're going to break next month $1 billion in conservation giving, a little program that we started several years ago. Well, thank you. And thank you for supporting the business members that started this and that continue to be a part of it. When we started it, we had no idea it could grow by leaps and bounds. And it's fishermen, fly fishermen, hunters, anglers from around the world that have made it a success. Right now, our biggest growth is in Europe. And that's kind of an embarrassment as an American. I'm thinking Europe, but no, France is the biggest country right now to contribute to 1% for the planet. You know, I wouldn't be here this evening had it not been for Nick and Mary Lyons and the Wellington and Laszlo families who own Spring Creek. Jimmy Wellington and his daughter Emily and Jeff Laszlo are here tonight, and they have protected and preserved and enhanced Spring Creek, much of it with their own money, with their own sweat and blood. And Nick wrote the wonderful book, Spring Creek, his iconic book, Spring Creek, all about the creek. And the creek has won National Wetlands Awards. It has enhanced wild trout population. A lot of people say, well, why would you want to enhance a trout stream that's on private property? Many of us will never get a chance to fish it. But it's like having a natural hatchery for the Madison River. I fished it the other day. I shouldn't say I fished it. I was with a gentleman that did fish it. And we're walking along, and you can't believe the number of rainbow reds, of spawning reds. And I've fished that creek since 1982. And I've never seen that many rainbow spawning reds on Spring Creek. These are fish that are coming out of the Madison River, rainbows and browns in the fall, spawning, that is enhancing the wild trout population in the Madison River system for all the public to enjoy. Again, I wouldn't be here this evening had it not been for Nick and Mary, the Wellington and Laszlo families, and I'm very grateful. Every time I walk into the angling collection, and MSU's angling collection, and their Spring Creek memories come flooding back to my angling soul through Mary Lyons' incredible paintings that grace the walls in the library. 46 years ago, my wife Jackie and I came to West Yellowstone. It's about 90 miles south up the road. And Jackie came as the police dispatcher for the town of West Yellowstone. And I was selected as the town's new police chief, the youngest police chief in the history of Montana. We're going to be here for 1 year. My old outfit back in Michigan gave me 1 year off to come here and be the police chief of West Yellowstone. And I guess we're not going back because that was in 1978 and we're still hanging out. You know, to supplement my huge, I had a $9,000 a year salary. And Jackie worked for $2.20 sub-minimum wage. The town had no money as a police dispatcher. And Bud Lilly, Chris Lilly's father, got a hold of me one day and he said, you know, you've been tying flies for me on and off while you've been in Michigan. We've been trading for rods and having a good time. You know, it was a big eagle thing. I'm tying flies for Bud Lilly's trout shop in West Yellowstone. He said, why don't you kind of supplement that meager income of yours and become a fishing guide, part-time fishing guide with me? I said, God, I never thought of that. So I said, okay, I'll guide fishermen. In typical Bud, the next day I show up to meet my first client, Nick Lyons. and I was just stunned. You know, Nick had been one of my idols, an author that I so looked up to and read everything that he ever wrote. And every article, every column that he penned for Fly Fisherman magazine, along with his iconic books, Bright Rivers and Fishing Widows, Seasonable Angler, and as well as several of the hundreds of books he had published from leading authors. To say I was lost for words is really not true, because I just stood there and stammered. But that didn't last long. Nick and I jumped in the old Suburban, strapped a drift boat to the back of the rig, and away we went down to float Varney, Dennis on my first guide trip. I'd never been Varney, Dennis. And I was a nervous wreck. So here we go. And when we arrived on the stream, I remember saying to Nick, well, what do you want to try today? And he looked over the flies and he saw a nature stonefly that Bud conned me into tying for his fly shop. And it was quite an involved pattern to tie, but he ordered 75 dozen of the damn things. And I worked all winter long, even before we made it to West Yellowstone, and I got them done. And I was anxious really to find out if they'd work on a float trip down the Madison River. I didn't have to wait long because on the second cast, Nick ties into this feisty 16-inch rainbow that jumps 3 or 4 times, and we brought it to net. And after landing several more fish that day, rainbows and browns, and as we sat on the bank at Crane Island below Varney Bridge and we're having lunch, Nick says, Craig, you got to write a doggone article about that fly. It's deadly and it's indestructible. And I went, Jesus Christ, I can barely spell my own name, and he's trying to con me into writing an article. You know, with his encouragement and under his tutelage, I did write that article, and we became lifelong friends. And since then, we've fished dozens of times together on the Madison, the Spring Creek, and other waters. And since Nick has inspired and encouraged and coached me into writing a few books on fishing the Yellowstone area. I fished side by side with Nick countless times when big trout fed selectively on mayflies and caddis. And I'm sure you've all read a little bit of Nick and how he writes about how clumsy and inept he is as an angler. But I've been with him too many times as he presents those pinpoint, perfect, accurate casts that defeat drag. They fool fish, and he skillfully brings the fish to hand. More than once, and I've got video of this that the library's going to get as soon as I get around to getting all my VHS together. I promised Jim I'd give it to him, but I've got a lot of video of Nick and Herb and I sitting on the bank of the Spring Creek, and more than once, Nick has turned to me battling a huge trout, sporting a big grin on his face and his pork pie hat, and he says, you know, despite all the fishing I've done or written about, I don't deserve this fish. Or he might say, oh, look, I found a volunteer trout that felt sorry for me and made a terrible mistake. Believe me, Nick is a skillful and skilled angler in all aspects of fly fishing, no matter what he might write or tell you. Obviously, Nick is not only a master angler, but we all know, an awesome author and publisher. He's always had wonderful relationships with dozens of authors, many who would have never been published had it not been for Nick giving them voice when no one else would have. You know, writers like Gary LaFontaine, Dave Whitlock, myself. Let me get to my notes here. I know I have a couple more. John Garrick, Lefty Cray, Swisher and Richards, Ted Leeson, Charlie Brooks, and so many others. Nick has encouraged and coached and got them writing their wonderful works. He's a national treasure. His works capture fly fishing so vividly, his readers not only feel it, but they not only see it, but they feel it deep in their souls. And I think that's what's so cool about what Nick writes. His evolution as an angler becomes a metaphor of life itself. Every angler will find themselves in his books and his articles. I like to think that the adjectives that demonstrate and describe the best of humankind apply to Nick. Tenacity, dignity, kindness, and unselfish energy to share his knowledge of our great sport. In everything he does, he has the gift of sight beyond ordinary vision, while always remaining so humble and generous. He's the easiest man to talk to, and has served roles as father, mentor, counselor, and best friend to many of us. At the same time, whenever I get impatient with a workload or fume at myself for making a bad presentation to a big trout, I just conjure up a memory of Nick, and the world is suddenly brightened. His works deliver many messages, all conveyed by his vivid prose. They're not complicated, nor are they different from other anglers' beliefs around the world. They share the bedrock values we all do as citizens. One of the most important being it's our duty, especially today, to take care of the natural world of trout, clean air and clean water. His works become a compass for life and a source of insight into our angling souls. They're perceptive and humorous at the same time, delivering accounts of his passion for our sport. Finally, his essays about anglers, fish, rivers, streams, and still waters teach us about life, love, birth and death, failure and success, and most of all about hope. Hope is that thing that fins in our soul and sings the tune, ironically, without words, and never stops at all. In your enhancement of our lives through your work, written and published, your friendship and generosity lie our eternal greatness. Gratitude to you, Nick. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you. I've never had more embarrassing things said. I have to say that you're not going to hear about what I've learned as a trout fisherman. There are people who do that much better. I'm going to tell some stories. And along with that, I'm going to have to do something that I have rarely done before, and that is read instead of talk. I'll try to make it not as boring a talk as I've heard in my graduate days when I had a professor in the Middle Ages. He was a medieval fellow himself. And he read from the same yellow notes that he must have made 70 years earlier, and he fell asleep during his own lecture. Put his head down on the podium. Everyone thought he died with his boots on. But I shall try to read this a little more slowly and tell you things that I have thought about when I sat down to write it. My old pal Sparse Gray Hackle, also called Deacon for his moral uprightness, had published several articles in Sports Illustrated before the magazine took an essay of his on a strict dry fly fisherman who once deigned to use an olive nymph. His editor at SI thought an olive nymph sounded like a typing error and blithely deleted the O. Deke called this the most egregious, libelous change of one letter in the history of the English language, and he never wrote for them again. The story always reminds me of one that Darrell told me of fishing on a river in Slovenia, a beautiful river. He suddenly looked to the side and noticed that across the river there was a soldier standing with an AK-47. Darrell said he just raised his arms and said, it's okay, I'm fishing a dry fly. I mentioned Sparse's piscatorial uprightness only to contrast it to me, who has so little of it. I began to fish before memory, and by 7, I was a dangerous little savage. At my grandfather's little hotel in the Catskills, I caught every small creature that moved: crayfish, newts, small shiners, grasshoppers, little frogs and worms. I sold the frogs for 5 cents apiece to a comedian at the hotel who put them under cups, that coffee cups on the tables. And someone in every dinner would turn the cup over, and one of my little frogs was there. When none of those little frogs and worms and other stuff worked, I had used every one of those creatures for bait at one time or another. I spotted a lovely new fish that I saw in a low summer creek. I tried everything. I couldn't catch the fish. And being a savage little 7-year-old, I rigged a number 4 Carlisle hook to an older branch and snagged the thing. It was my first trout, a gorgeous fish with mottled back, smooth skin, no pesky scales, and I compounded my sin by lying in my teeth and telling a visiting fly fisherman that I had caught it on a worm, which seemed to me much more moral than what I'd done. I didn't fish a live nymph only because I didn't know what they were. In my early teens in Brooklyn, I biked to Steeplechase Pier in Coney Island to fish for a motley crew of flounder, skate, fluke, blowfish, and a hideously ugly fish called the hacklehead. And at 14, I began to take the subway and then the milk train to upstate New York to fish for trout. It was a full 3-hour trip, 6 hours back and forth. Now my confession gets worse, because there is no more lethal angler in the world than a deft teenager with a spinning rod and a large creel. I'll say no more about that. Except that one of my fishing pals on a long trip home once calmly ate an egg salad sandwich to which he had added a leftover night crawler. At 23, I fell in love with a beautiful painter with fuzzy hair, frizzy hair, and with fly fishing. In graduate school one weekend, we stopped at a bridge over Michigan's Osable River. I could never pass up a bridge over fishable water, and I still can't. This time, there was a fully costumed fly fisherman casting a large blonde fly into the current line between sweepers on the left bank. His casts were rhythmic and accurate, and my eyes were stuck on that blonde fly as it floated freely under the branches. There was a quick burst of water and an electric jolt in my chest. The man raised his arm, and then it bent, raised his rod, and then it bent, and then a trout cleared the water and shook bent double. On a trip to Moscow to the country, the great Russian memoirist Aksakov saw for the first time folks fishing. He says in his memoir that it so stunned him, and he became so obsessed that his family was sick and treated him for weeks for his sickness of having discovered fishing. I became obsessed also. I put my spinning stuff into a back closet and bought a cheap fiberglass fly rod, white as I remember. Didn't work very well. And I asked myself whether there was anything more lovely than those mysterious feathered things that I laid out on my bed and had no idea what to do with. Or soon, the grace of bamboo and the bright new world I found in certain fishing books in all moving water. Living in New York City with a batch of kids, high rent, and trying to negotiate a life as an English professor and a second full-time job as an apprentice editor in a book publishing firm, fly fishing became a tough game for me. But my passion kept growing. I haunted nearby tackle shops during lunch hour, hungry for talk about flies and reels, new rivers and strategies. I dreamed of bright rivers during gray and raucous business meetings. Even big puddles reminded me of trout and rivers, and so did fountains, a warm pond in Central Park, and even somehow pigeons. I knew there was something I could do with those pigeons. I tried to tie flies, and despite my 3 thumbs, I actually invented a new pattern, very early in my game. Everyone wants a fly with his name on it. And I invented the Lyons pigeon quill. Its body was made from a pigeon quill that I found in the gutter near Riverside Park. It was a large fly, and I had my hopes for it, but when I tried it, it sank like a stone. Later, I found discarded bits of mink and lesser furs in the streets of New York's garment district. A tire's fortune lying there just for the picking. And I remember buying a 4-foot bag of nutria for $5 and immediately sent it to Craig Matthews to hoping that we could corner the nutria market in fly tying. Unfortunately, there was none. Nobody wanted nutria. It would have changed the entire fly fishing world. We both would have been rich and gone to Paris, but today he probably has someplace 99% of it, or has dumped it, or the like. Don't try nutria. It was a great experiment, business experiment, and it failed terribly. It's funny, I wrote an article on finding that fur down in the garment district, and somehow it introduced me to Paul Volcker, who was then the Fed chief, and we became pals. He loved that story about my great failure in business of trying to corner the market. Anyway, all this changed my family life. And once, before cell phones came in, and you could contact anyone from anywhere, I could not leave a dramatic caddis hats at dusk on the Willowee-Mock. When I got home around midnight, my 4 children were asleep. The apartment was eerily quiet. On the top of my tackle satchel, I saw my wife's lovely little wedding ring, which I returned to its proper owner and remained there where it remained for another 50 years. But it was a great shock when I saw them. I read every fly fishing book I could find and was especially interested in the world of bugs, about which I knew nothing. A friend mentioned Art Flick's Streamside Guide, out of print for more than 30 years, having been remaindered the first time it was sold. And after I found a copy and then found Art and spoke to him, I told the editor-in-chief where I worked that I wanted to sign up the book. He told me Crown had once published a book on trout fishing years earlier, and that it had bombed. I was always amused at what led people to not select a book in the publishing world. And I'll tell you about one in a few minutes, about a machine that predicted the number of the books that could be sold of a particular kind. He told me that Crown had published this book, and he asked if we shouldn't be publishing something new and not on the narrow world of fly fishing. A small how-to, perhaps. Lots of pictures on all forms of fishing with bait and lures in fresh and salt water. An idea that appealed to me not a bit then or now. A week later, I pitched him again, more firmly this time, hinting that I might bolt Crown and find a suitable publisher for the books that now interested me. I said I had asked a few stores if they'd handle the flick, and they said sure, they'd take a few. I went to him immediately with this slim evidence, and the man threw me a bone without enthusiasm, and I set about editing a new edition of Art's book, which was far more interesting to me than editing potential bestsellers on war, or sex, which Crown craves. I contacted Orvis to see if they'd take a handful of copies, and they said they'd been looking for a good entomology book, and they'd start with 5,000 copies. The publisher said Orbis, O-R-B-I-S, which is another house. He said they were reliable, and so we pushed ahead. I thought a Streamside Guide might profit from a water-resistant binding. The editor-in-chief said we needed folks to buy a new copy if one fell in the drink, and he suggested a lead binding. When the flick went into a third printing in the first month, they begged me to find more. What publisher wouldn't want some minor editor just learning the business having a book that went through 3 printings in a month and had eaten up easily 12,000 copies of the book? And this began one of the happiest periods of my life. I had not a whit of skill finding bestsellers on war or sex or editing those of other published editors that had signed up. But I couldn't fly fish my little heart out in the midst of New York, and I thought it might help to find and publish a line of worthwhile fishing books. I found old, previously remaindered books by Vince Marinaro, Jim Lisenring, and Preston Jennings. Actually, the book Crown said that had bombed and was the Preston Jennings book, A Book of Trout Flies. I boldly called the series Sportsman's Classics, which were anything I chose was automatically. I added new and practical books like the Swisher Richards Selective Trout, helpful guides like A Little Book on Knots by Lefty Cray and Mark Sosin, Lefty on saltwater fly fishing, Trey Combs on steelhead, books by Bud Lilly, Charlie Brooks, Craig Matthews, and the very successful Trout on a Fly by 2 British writers, John Goddard and Brian Clark. I republished literary titles like Haig Brown's wonderful Season series, Skewies, and other of the best English writers. And then Ted Leeson's masterful book, Habit of Rivers, Sparse's Fishless Days, Angling Nights, 2 short books by John Girac, who was by that time quite famous, My Moby Dick by Bill Humphrey, a small but very brilliant book, a new Robert Traver book, John Cole's delicious book, Well, Fishing Came First. The title relates to his father telling him when he got out of the army that all he was interested in was fishing and girls. And John said, at least he got the order right. Later, on a strong suggestion by Tom McGuane, I took an English book called by Luke Jennings called Blood Knot. It's a brilliant book. I've forgotten 100 others that I was involved with, some of which when I had my own press. The details often blur in my brain, but that troubles me not at all. As long as they were done, and I still hear of them now and then, I'm delighted with what I did. For a while, I felt a little like John D. Rockefeller with my narrow little series, who once cabled an associate sent to buy up all the small refineries that made up his monopoly. And his cable said, take all the business you can get. When I started the series, Sparse, very gruff and deaconish, as always, abruptly said he was withdrawing his book and I couldn't publish it. The book was already in galleys. It had been delayed, as books sometimes are, and rescheduled from May to August. Worst possible time, he complained. He'd return his advance, pay for production so far. It proved Crown had absolutely no hopes for his little book whatsoever. In 3 long letters, I agreed that the time might be bad for fishing, but it was perfect for reading. And publishers thought August perfect for Christmas. It was about the best I could muster to get him to stay put. I figured we could sell a few thousand but wildly, for some reason, said we were printing 7,500, which was absurd. "You'll remainder them all," said Sparse. The editor-in-chief agreed. He told me it was impossible to sell so many copies of a storybook on fly fishing. Would Orbis sell it? One day, this Orbis kept turning up whenever I signed up a new book. I don't know what they do, but they are a big company, and apparently the people at Crown love them. In the end, I offered, and what turned to Sparse's mind, I offered him a disastrously stupid bet that we'd sell the whole 7,500 by November of that year. Sparse just grinned happily and loved bets and took it on his terms, which was a dime. And by some divine miracle, we rushed out another printing before the holidays. But when I kept demanding my damn dime, he growled, "You'll get it, Buster." In April, he came into my office in his dark suit, starch white shirt, black tie and vest, with his quarter-inch thick glasses, looking like a gnome or a tax collector, and said, "I always pay my debts, bub." And he dumped a package on my desk and left. It was a leather-bound copy of his book with a gold leaf message thanking me, and in the center, embedded in the leather, there was a bright new dime. I felt cocky after a while that I could publish any fly fishing book that took my fancy, that intrigued me, and see it succeed. So I published French Fishing Flies, about as obscure a book as you could imagine, to show how the French did it, and a short esoteric gem on bamboo, what it is, how it gets here, how we use it. Nothing practical in it at all. Neither of them sold more than 700 copies apiece. And I missed some wonderful books and published my share of Melt Lemons. I'm still proud of having done practical fishing, French Fishing Flies, and the bamboo book. They turn up now and then as rare books and sell for as much as $150 each. Ah, dear, business. How I failed so miserably at it every time I tried with all my schemes. The authors varied immensely, and some became close friends, others not so much. Marinaro, whose work I admired, never smiled, though I published 2 books very successfully for his. His A Modern Trout, Modern Dry Fly Code had been remaindered and sold under 1,000 copies in the 1950s. I believe it has sold about 50 or 60,000 since I published it. I admired his work. He cornered me at a Trout Unlimited gathering and said he planned to sue me and to sue the bastards Swisher and Richards because they had stolen his fly with no hackles. Me for having published their book. One author spoke of catching 63 trout in a couple of hours. Before I could admit that 2 or 3 interesting trout a day usually satisfied me very nicely, and that he should calculate how many that meant he'd caught per minute, a friend of his revealed that the man counted inspection rises also. Numbers, of course, are important to too many experts. The higher the number, the greater their fame, the larger their head. Craig told me of one expert who caught a nice 15-inch rainbow on the Madison, and by the time they went from Ennis to West Yellowstone, the fish had grown a full 6 inches. More honestly, Arnold Gingrich told me, he wrote me from Montana, that he had caught 19 inches worth of trout in 3 installments. At lunch with Gingrich and Charles Ritz, whose book I was then publishing, forgive me for dropping these names. That's just their names. I don't know what else to do. I asked Ritz how he'd liked his recent first trip to the Keys for saltwater fishing. He was in his mid-80s, very feisty, and had just moved his mistress into his Ritz Hotel in Paris. He replied, loudly enough for every sedate diner in the small sedate restaurant, a very pricey place, "Ah, this saltwater fly fishing, it is for men with hard stomachs like sex after lunch." When I went to the Keys several years later and told the story to Joan Wolfe, she asked, "What did you come down here for?" Which? The fishing. I found time during those years to begin a last page column for Fly Fisherman magazine called The Seasonable Angler. I did so with immense delight. I wrote from my heart, mostly about the fun of fly fishing, its variety, the people who did it, and my own comic disasters, of which, Craig, there were many. I wrote those shaggy fish tales, 6 a year, for more than 20 years, and stopped not because I ran out of subjects, because I don't think I've ever been on the water when I haven't come back with a little story along with whatever I caught. In fact, one night I fished with a man named Ed Van Putt, a very, very good Catskill fly fisherman. He stood right next to me, pointed out some risers. I kept casting to them just as the dusk came. Didn't catch a fish. And I got back to the car and I noticed the end of my leader had been burned off with the cigar I smoked in those days. That's like the emperor's new clothes, trying to catch something. News of my series at Crown got to England, and I was approached to start a U.S. subsidiary to an old British publishing house called Ben Brothers. I was tempted. I dreamed for years of having a press of my own once I started with this publishing business, which is very addictive and very, very pleasant. The British plan was to publish a lot more fly fishing titles. A few of them sold a lot so that people kept demanding more and more, and I had trouble keeping them down to the best books that were submitted to me, and some that I found. I wondered whether there were enough yet. Still, I became, in my sole person, the whole subsidiary. I was shocked, though, to learn that my mandate was not to publish the books, but to package books. This means I signed, edited, and physically produced a whole run of an edition, and beforehand sold all the books to a big publisher to publish under its name. This reduced the financial risk for the British, but it was dumb and frustrating. Doubleday took my proposal for a general book on bass fishing and ran it through a weird early kin to AI, designed to reveal precisely how many copies a book would sell. The ridiculous machine told them that 25,000 was a safe bet. The British, despite my strong quarrels, said, "Take the money and run." Doubleday barely sold 4,000 copies of the book. It pulped over 20,000 at a few pennies each. One perk to my deal with the British was irresistible. Every June, when I finished a semester at Hunter College, I went to Berkshire and fished the wilderness section of the magnificent Kennet River, an exquisite chalk stream, the first I'd ever seen. I loved the new challenge. I learned to fish only to a rising fish with a dry fly, upstream only. This restriction and others dramatically changed much of how I fished for years after. Let me see much more of a river's life, to study the creature we pursued, to cast much less, and never to fish blindly. After too many pratfalls my first visit, I really do fall down a lot, Craig. When I returned the next year, I overheard John Goddard's wife say that she'd come to the rivers, to the club waters, not to be with all of the fishermen, but to see this Yankee bloke and his comic act. By mid-afternoon, I had not performed as expected, but soon afterward, I fished from the top of a freshly dredged mud bank, hooked and caught a respectable brown, and leaning down to release it, slipped full force down the mud into the sweet kennet, almost drowning. As I returned to the home pool, 2 members of the club could not stop laughing hysterically. John's wife smiled with satisfaction, and when I undressed and showered at Neil Patterson's house, I left a bum print on the wall. Neil left it there for several years, where it became the most minor of fly fishing artifacts. Lefty told me he saw it, and so did a few others. So it became a kind of international shrine or something. Unfortunately, it could not be transferred to Jim Thule's Salmonid collection, but he may have a photo in the unlikely event that anyone is interested in a mud print of my ass. After 5 long years in which I produced about 50 books, I learned how to make them, and an austere man flew to New York and told me that the board had decided to sell the subsidiary to another firm that had expressed strong interest. My staying was part of the deal. I told him that the stock, all the books, belonged to those who had bought it, not to him anymore. The assets I owned in the little room I worked from were a typewriter, some files, a second-hand desk, several dozen books, and me. I quietly had to tell him that I was not for sale, but maybe I'd be the buyer. I raised money from 7 friends, including substantial amount of money from a lovely man named Vern Gallup, who has given many books to the collection here. He's one of the most serious collector of rare books there was. And when I needed about $50,000 to buy up a whole bunch of books from Crown, where I'd first worked, I remember Vern was heading to some property he had in South America, and he sent me a quick letter, a check for $20,000, and a note that simply said, "If you need more, ask Joan." It was just one of the loveliest things I've gotten. His daughter is here tonight, and I was very pleased to meet her for the first time. So my friends, my stockholders, loaned me more money, and I aggressively bought back all the books I'd packaged that was still in stock. And while I was at it, I bought all the fly fishing titles I'd done at Crown, including Art Flick's Streamside Guide, Vince Marinaro's book, Selective Trout, and all the others, most of which were languishing. This gave me a strong backlist that I knew well and knew how to publish. None of the big publishers, Crown included and Doubleday, knew much about what to do with books with titles like Emergers, Nymphs, No Hackle Flies, or A Modern Dry Fly Code, and were pleased to sell them to someone who did. The Lyons Press published a broader list, kept fly fishing as a core group. I never wanted to publish more fly fishing books just to have more on the list. I wanted the best, the few best, and they were hard to come by. I think more and more people started to write about fly fishing. I once had wrote an article that ended up on the front page of the Times Book Review, which is one of the most powerful organs in the business. And I had the absurd stupidity of saying in the article, which was about rejecting books, I said a little line, a very short line that said, at least I read every book that comes in onto my desk. And I did. I would look at every one of them. I never rejected something out of hand. But the result of that was that I must have gotten 50 or 60 fishing books within the next few months, of which I found, unfortunately, none that I thought I could publish. Happily, the business grew and flourished for about 20 years, and then, always restless as I was, I sold it. Happily, all the investors made many times their investments, and happily, it now has good management and some editors who know the difference between an olive nymph and a live one. My children were grown, and I then got the first fully free time since I was in my early 20s. Sandy Bing, an old Army friend, introduced me to Herbert Wellington, and we began a warm friendship that led to my visiting his Longhorn Ranch for long visits, 5 or 6 times. There is a Wellington here, 2 Wellingtons here tonight, and I'm proud to see them. One I hadn't seen since she was 5, and happy to see her now as a grown woman. I love generations. I love things that continue, that don't always go forward, but also grab the past, and bring it up for us. My experience on Odell Creek was the most exhilarating of my fly fishing life. Every morning for that first month, we'd stash our gear in his old tan Suburban and head across the bench to the river, which lay like a great blue ribbon spread through the vast Madison Valley. Mary painted watercolors every day from the valley or from the bench. At first I caught nothing and wondered whether my time on the Kenneck had taught me nothing. Herb was a master fly fisher. He cast a long, low line with little more than one back cast. He positioned himself deftly. He had settled on a few productive fly patterns. He seemed to know the fish by name and how to pitch the proper fly to them. I learned how to approach and fish, bend, riffle a pool without spooking fish, how to put my fly above its feeding position without lining it. I fished more deliberately. I waited until the fish were truly up and not just one risers, as he called them. I learned how to cast a PMD delicately into the current line, framing the opposite bank. Watching Herb, listening to him advise me with his brusque baritone, watching Craig when he visited, I became more and more adept. And before I left for the 5th year, I think, that I was there, Herb asked me to guide John Goddard, Lefty, Al McLean, Datus Proper, and other visitors. With Lefty one afternoon, I made, with dumb luck, a very successful cast, caught a tough trout, and Lefty said, I'd lied for all of those years, just as Craig is lying in his teeth about how inept I was. After my 3rd trip to Odell, I wrote Spring Creek. Every detail of my days on the remarkable river came back to me quickly and vividly. The book is still in print 30 years later, and so are dozens of the other books I packaged or published, a few in hundreds in the hundreds of thousands of copies, quite literally. Tom Rosenbauer's book, The Orvis Fly Fishing Guide, I think has sold 300,000, and Swisher Richards has sold several hundred thousand. The last fish I caught 4 years ago was from a friend's 24-foot boat in Florida called the Fish Basher. He and his captain chucked baited shrimp into a honey hole they'd found over a reef. I instantly hooked a mangrove snapper, he handed the rod to me, took back the rod when the fish came aboard, and then unhooked the dancing creature and forced out another cast of shrimp. I laughed a lot, and my partner Ruth, who was here, caught her first and only fish, and the fillets were delicious. But I smiled sadly and thought how far I'd fallen since fishing a number 17 Trout PMD or a little X-Caddis on Odell, and as always making some words of it, which I always like to do. And now, too soon, I'm pushing 94 with titanium hips that have dislocated twice, half a dozen stents, rotten balance that makes me shy of boats and rivers. My short-term memory is like Swiss cheese, and many of my pleasures have slipped downstream. But my head is a hive of treasured memories that do not fade, mostly of rivers, bright, green, live rivers, the coil and swoop of them, their dancing riffles and flat, dimpled pools at dusk, their changes and undulations, each different yard of the dozens I fished, but mostly Odell. I see the quick turn of a yellow-bellied brown in the lip of the current. Here and there a snout breaks the surface, or circles grow and vanish. A world, many worlds. Suddenly, I'm holding a trout, sleek, cold, spotted with rose moles, and my empty hand places it back into the world, its world, and I am cut free from this world of crises and trepidation, the dross and gray, from the horror of war and the inconveniences of old age. And then all that is outside of me, is suddenly gone. And for a moment, I am that river. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
What a delight. Thank you so much. And you're so eloquent. You're a tough act to follow here. So thank you all for coming. I do want to alert you to a few things. First of all, there is a reception following this out in our lobby, so I encourage you to check that out. And we have a display out there from Jody and Amelia from our archives and special collections, and you can go to check that out outside there. I'd like to thank Nick for coming here. It's a big deal for you to have traveled this far, and we really appreciate you spent your time with us. I also want to thank you. I also want to thank Charlie and Ruth for helping get Charlie out here and supporting him in this journey. And if you aren't aware, we have some of Nick's papers in our collection. So his collections include things like corporate documents, books, original editorial manuscripts, galleys of books, rough drafts, books, articles, columns. It goes on and on. And so we have his papers in our collection. We also have Craig Matthews' papers in our collection. And I want to point out that Bruce Morton, who's professor and dean emeritus of the MSU library, he's the one that started this initiative. So he helped get people like Nick on board with helping preserve his legacy through that route of putting that in our collections. So I think it's really important to understand that if you really enjoyed what Nick had to say, which I can't imagine you didn't, you can learn more about him through our collections, and I encourage you to come to the library and check more of that out. I also just want to thank a few people who helped make this happen. Chris Lilly, who's our Friends of the Library Board president, and is here in the front row. Thank you, Chris, for being here. We have some other members of our Friends of the Library Board, including Cameron and Rick are here. Is anybody else from the Friends Board here? Okay, so thank you for being here. Thanks as well to Kate for helping from the foundation. We have our own employees, Jan, Gavin, Beck, and Jody. So thank you all for so much of your planning. And then thank you again to Opera Montana for being present and kicking us off on a really nice note for the evening. So I have a gift bag for Nick here.
Oh my goodness,
So, yeah, you're welcome.
thank you very much.
Full of fishy things.
I'll do that.
My only regret is that we were not able to collect that muddy print. Now I'm, you know, the competitive version of me wants to go get that complete collection. So.
When I talked to Neil, he's framed it. It is under glass and preserved.
Okay, so the print is under glass and preserved. So that's the most important thing, is the preservation piece. So anyway, and again, we heard a lot about our collection at the beginning, but I do encourage you to think about giving to our MSU library so we can continue to grow our collections and provide opportunities like this. So please stick around. I'll have a chance to talk with Nick out at the reception, and if you go out this door, that'll be the best route to get to the food. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your evening.